Hey guys, Lewis here with website Bytes, and welcome to our JavaScript crash course. If you're watching this, I'm going to assume that you already know a little bit about HTML and CSS. If not, I'll leave some links in the description, but I'm not going to be covering anything like that obviously in this crash course because this is meant for JavaScript. So if you don't know anything, watch those, come back, you'll have a bit of a better understanding how we're going to be working with certain things here. But if you don't know what it is, JavaScript is a language that's primarily used to help interact with a website. At least in web development it is. So you can perform arithmetic, you can store and pass certain variables, you can gather information from certain places, you can validate forms with it. There's a huge array of things that you can do with JavaScript, and we're going to cover a large majority of that today. So JavaScript is normally held in a script file, so a .js file. However, you can include it directly into your form here, and or into your HTML document even so. So the first way that you can do it is just after your body tags here, you can create a script tag. And inside of this script tag, you can write any kind of JavaScript scripts, and they'll output to the page. So just for an example, we're going to create an alert, and we're going to have it say hello world. Now with a JavaScript, it always end your arguments or your statements or your lines, whatever you want to call them, with a semicolon. That way that you know they're going to be formatted properly. So alert hello world, if we refresh this, you'll now see we get an alert saying hello world. So you can include all your JavaScripts in here, and everything I'm about to show you can be done in this as well. However, a better way really to do it would be to link to an external JavaScript file, and to do this, let's get rid of this. We can put those script tags onto the same line, and we can add a source attribute to this, and I'm going to call mine scripts.js. So we're going to save this, and then we'll go file, new file, and we'll save this into the same place as our index, and we'll just call this scripts.js. Now if we were to do the same thing in here, so if we just shout out a hello world, save that and refresh, you'll see we're still getting that alert pop up because our script tag here is looking at the source of scripts.js. It's then taking us to this file here, which is allowing us to output whatever would have been in that script tag into here. And obviously keeping it in here keeps it a lot neater as well, because then you don't have JavaScript in here. You can solely have your HTML and just link externally to it. Another advantage of having it like this as well is if you have quite a large JavaScript that's not really affecting how the website looks at all, you can add a async tag in here as well. It doesn't need any arguments, you can just add async, and what that tells it to do is as the page is rendering and it gets down to this script tag, it will load this at the same time. So if you had another script tag in here, then it will load these two at the same time instead of loading this one and then waiting for this one to be loading before loading that one, because obviously that can slow down loading times. So that's a good thing of linking to it externally as well. But if you're not too fussed about loading everything as quickly as possible, then you don't need the async tag. So there's four main ways that you can output with JavaScript. The first one being alert, which we've already covered. So inside of alert, you can use these single quotation marks, or you can also use double quotation marks. Normally the case, so if you're using one, stick with it and use it throughout. Don't swap between them, because that can make things confusing. So for this crash course, at least, we're going to be using single quotation marks. And inside of here, we'll just say I am alert. Save and refresh. Obviously you've already seen this, pops down that alert box. Another way that you can output is to console.log. So if we say console.log, and then in the same format, single quotation marks, we say I am a console entry. Save and refresh. You can see that this is our browser console here. So like kind of debug if you like, and we've now got a console entry. It's now printed a line into the console, which we're going to be using a lot during this tutorial, so that's very handy. Another thing to do is you can target specific HTML elements. So inside of index.html here, I've made a p tag with the ID of content, and we're going to target this specifically and fill this with some text. And the way that we do this is by saying document.get element by ID, and the capitalization in this is important as well. JavaScript is case sensitive, so you need to make sure that you're putting the right capitals in the correct places. We'll then give it some brackets, single quotation marks, and we'll put in the ID tag of the element that we want to target. And then we can say .inner HTML equals, and then I am a p tag. Finish it with a semicolon. Save and refresh this, and you can see we've now got text inside of here. If we inspect that element, you can see that this is our p tag with the ID of content, and it's now populated that tag with some content, which is very nice. And another thing you can do as well, which is kind of not used much, not really at all, is document.write. And with document.write, we'll say I have been written to the document. We'll save and refresh this, and you can see it's now been pretty much replaced where the p tag is. However, this is positioned instead just outside of any kind of element, so it's not a particular inner element. So if you had a p tag, or you had a whole entire website, for instance, and you were to document.write, it's going to write this out at the bottom of that web page, and so it's obviously very unpredictable as to where it's going to be, and useful really only for debugging, but even then you'd use console.log. So it's there if you need it, but you shouldn't need to. So one of the main things with JavaScript that makes it really handy is when you're declaring variables, you don't have to declare the type of the variable. So for example, to declare a variable inside of JavaScript, you just begin by typing var and then the name of your variable. So this one's going to be my name, an equals sign, and then whatever that variable is going to hold. So we'll just put Lewis, and then again end it with a semicolon. And note here, we haven't stated that it's a string, but JavaScript's automatically going to understand that that is a string. Equally, we can say var my age, and I can just type 18 in here, which I am, semicolon, and you can see with this being an integer, we don't need to put this in any kind of quotation marks, and so JavaScript is now again going to understand that that is an age, or not an age, so an integer. Additionally, you can kind of have what's called a double in other languages, so you can combine the two. So we can say my date of birth, and then we can say an equals, and then inside of quotation marks, let's put 23rd of May. Mark it on your calendars, cheers. And so that's obviously going to output 23rd of May. You've got an integer and a string in the same place there. You've also got arrays, so if we say var favfilms equals, and then to declare an array, you've got two square brackets, and your elements go inside of here, so we'll have quotation marks, and we'll say Pulp Fiction, if I can spell it properly. And then outside of those quotation marks, put a comma, space, you don't have to have a space, and then your next one, so we'll say Shawshank Redemption, absolute classic, although I spelt redemption wrong there, redemption. And let's just add another one in, so we'll say Fight Club. What's the first rule? First person to comment gets a 5 stars. And so once you've got your elements or whatever in your array, you can close it again with a semicolon. So that is arrays. I'll come back to those in a little bit, very handy. Another thing is a Boolean, so if we say var, let's go with likes t, that's a classic, and we'll say true, obviously. So a Boolean can either be a true or a false, so in this case likes t, true, however it could also be false. For the time being though, we're just going to say true. And lastly, you can have an object, which in some cases can be output or passed as a JSON, but I'm going to cover that a little bit later on. So in this case, we're just going to say make a variable called Lewis, and inside of these curly braces, we're going to assign a couple of things. So we're going to say name, colon, and then inside of these quotation marks, because it's going to be a string, we'll say Lewis, and then we'll have a comma, and we'll say age, colon, and then because this is an integer, we'll leave it outside, and then comma, space, date of birth, and then inside of our quotation marks, we'll say 23rd of May, and you can kind of see where this is going. So instead of defining everything individually, we can put it all inside of a object like this, and you can keep going on. And so for example, if we were to have favorite films, we'd put a comma, we'd say films, and then you'd declare it the same way. So you'd have two square brackets, and we can just copy out of here what we've got, put it inside of there. And then we might as well go the full 9 yards. So we'll say likes T, or we'll just say T, and we'll say true. Okay, end it with a semicolon, and they are your variables. Now, obviously, to output your variables, in this case, we're just going to go with console.log. So if we were to output my name, save and refresh, you can see it's going to output Lewis. Same with my age. It's also going to output that. And the same for date of birth. If you've got an array, so if we're going to output favorite films, you'll see in this case, most text editors, consoles even, sorry, will try to pass things in a certain way. So you can see it's outputting it all here in one line. And then if you drop down, it's giving you the indexes for each of them as well. But say we only wanted to target maybe the second film in here, what you'll notice is the indexes start at 0. So if we wanted to output the second film in the list, we'd say console.log fav films, put 2 square brackets, and then we'll actually put a number 1 in. So if you think about it, the way that it counts traditionally, you'd say 1, 2, 3, but JavaScript counts 0, 1, 2, right? So the second element is actually going to be number 1. And that's the case kind of throughout the language. So if we save and refresh this now, you'll see it's going to output Shawshank Redemption because it's at index 1. So you've got index 0, index 1. So it's outputting that. So if you were to output likes T, obviously it's going to output true. And if we were to output Lewis, if we were to just output Lewis as it is, because it's a JavaScript object, you'll see it's passing it all out as such. In some cases, it won't pass it out as this, and especially if you want to print it out onto the page, it won't pass out as that. So a good way to ensure that it passes properly is by saying JSON.stringify, and then in brackets, your object. So if we were to save and refresh this now, you're going to see that it outputs a bit more like a text, but that was going to be consistent browser-wise, content-wise, and it makes it a lot easier to pass. So if we were to now target maybe, let's have a look, what should we choose out of here? Date of birth. So we want to target date of birth inside of this whole object. It's actually very easy to do in JavaScript. So because it's an object, we can just do Lewis.date of birth. And if we were to save and refresh this, you'll see it's looking inside of our object here, Lewis. It's scanning through until it finds the element date of birth, and it's going to output the value assigned to that, which is fantastic. Equally, the way that we can combine this with how we were outputting our array before, if we were to output Lewis.films, save and refresh, you can see it's output all of them. However, if we wanted to only output the first one there, we'd say output Lewis.films at index 0, which will give us Pulp Fiction. So that's all well and good. You can output your variables that you've just created, fantastic. But if you're trying to debug code that's already there, and you're finding it hard to kind of find what a certain variable is, whether it's a string, whether it's an integer, whether it's an array, and there's certain things attached onto it, a handy thing to use, if we console.log in brackets, you can use what's called type of. So if you type, literally just type of all as one, and then the variables, if we say my name, save and refresh, you'll see it's going to output string. So you know that the variable my name is then a string, and obviously it changes per 1. So we can say my age, refresh, it's now a number, and films, save, refresh, we now get an object. So you can make variables, you can output variables, and then you can identify later on what variables are, which is fantastic using the type of, so very handy. Okay, so once you understand variables, the next most important thing with JavaScript is its arithmetic or its logic, kind of fundamental to any scripting language really. So I'm going to show you basically some simple examples here. So let's make a variable and we'll call it result, and we will assign it 5 plus 3. And so obviously here we're not giving it a single value, instead we're giving it 2 values, obviously with the operator here of a plus sign, so it's going to add these 2 together. So if we save that and then we console.log the result, save and refresh, you'll see we're getting 8 on the output here. So this is at its core JavaScript's arithmetic. Obviously, we can take it a step further than that. So we're going to type var. Let's have num a being equal to 5. And a handy thing here, which I'm going to show you, is with declaring variables. Obviously, if you're declaring a huge amount of variables right at the top of your page, you don't have to type out var space every time. So for the lazy ones out there, as well as myself, it's very handy once you've declared your variable. So we'll say num a here, instead of putting the semicolon, put comma, enter, and then we'll say num b, and we'll give num b the value of 3. And then underneath here, let's say result 2, just for really good naming conventions, and we'll say num a plus num b, and we'll end it with a semicolon. And then again, we will console.log result 2. So what we'll get now if we refresh is 8 again, because we've assigned 5 to the variable num a. We've then assigned 3 to the variable of num b, and the result is taking num a, num b, it's taking the values within those two variables and it's adding them together. So as well as that, you've also got subtract. So we can subtract num b from num a, which obviously gives us 2. You can multiply with the asterisk sign. 5 times 3 is obviously 15. You can divide with the /, which will divide those numbers. We're going to take a look about rounding this off a little bit later on as well, so don't worry about that. You can also have a look at modulus or remainder. So that's done with a percentage sign. You can see obviously 3 only goes into 5 once, and then you have 2 left over, 2 remainder. You can also increment as well. So if we were to increment num a, you can go to the start and put 2 plus signs at the start of the variable name. And if we refresh this, you can see it's now 6. So it's taken 5, it's added 1 to it, which is obviously 6, and it's output that. That works the other way as well. So if you put 2 minus signs in front of it, refresh, we're now incrementing back by 1, so it outputs 4. So they're very handy for loops, which is again something we're going to cover a little bit later on. But that is basically the core of arithmetic. There's a couple of other things which we'll quickly cover. Obviously, this can get a little bit tedious with all the typing out. So there is a shorthand version of this. So let's get rid of all of this, and we'll make a new variable called x, and we'll assign it to 10. Now with x, say we wanted to reassign x to a new value, we can just say x equals 5 with a semicolon. That's now going to make x have the value of 5 instead of 10. And just to prove that, let's get it console login. So we'll refresh. You can see it's outputting 5 instead of 10 now. Neaten the code up a little bit here, Lewis. Come on, what are you playing at? If we were to add 5 to 10, we can put a plus equals, save that and refresh. You see it's now putting output in 15. So we're adding 5 to the original value of x now. So instead of plus plus, we're just doing plus equals, which is very handy. Equally, you can do minus equals. So if we were to subtract 5 from 10, we get 5. You can also do times equals, and you can see where this is going. It's the same as the arithmetic, so you're basically appending to the number. So now we're doing 5 times 10, which is obviously 50. You can also do your divide and equals, refresh, which gives us 2. And then you can also give us the modular of 5 onto 10, which is 0. Right, so a huge array of different things there that you can do, but that is at its core the arithmetic. And if you can master those operations and those operands, they will honestly give you a huge advantage in definitely problem solving inside of JavaScript. So worth learning. Okay, so something else at JavaScript's core is its functions. So to declare a function, you start off by typing function, and then you give it a function name. So in this case, let's just call it a function name. You then follow it by 2 brackets, and inside of these 2 brackets go your parameters. So we'll call it parameter 1. And then to separate your parameters, separate them with a comma. So now we can say parameter 2. And then once you've defined all your different parameters, we'll cover what they mean in a minute. You escape those single brackets, go into curly brackets, and then inside of these curly brackets is where you define what your function's to do. So with every function you have a return. So in this case, this function is going to return the multiplication of both of our parameters. So we'll say parameter 1 asterisk parameter 2, end it with a semicolon. So what this is going to do is if we pass in two different numbers, it's going to times them together and return it for us. So an easy way for us to demonstrate this is if we console.log and then in brackets, the way that you call a function is by typing its name. So we'll say function name. And then if you've got parameters to be passed to the function, such as we have here, you don't always have to have parameters to be passed if it's running a loop on a text document or it's gathering information from online somewhere. Obviously, you don't technically need parameters, but in this case we do. So we're going to pass in the 5 as parameter 1, and then obviously we'll do a comma, and we'll pass in 7, let's say, as parameter number 2. So we'll save that, refresh, and you can see that we get 35 output. So it's taken 5, it's passed 5 in here, so that gets replaced with 5, that gets replaced with 7, and it times them together, returns it, and obviously as a return we get 35, which is 5 times 7, which is very handy. Another kind of handy example I guess we can use is converting Fahrenheit to Celsius. I think it's only the Americans that have this problem now, but Fahrenheit, obviously the incorrect measurement of weather. Instead, Celsius, much better, much more accurate. So we'll go to, that's going to upset a few people, I know that, I do apologise. So let's call this function 2 Celsius, and inside of here, we're only going to have one parameter here, which is going to be the Fahrenheit, so we're going to convert it. So let's see if I can remember how to spell Fahrenheit. That looks right. So we've only got one parameter at this time, and if you know the function to convert Fahrenheit to Celsius, you do 5 divided by 9, and then you times that by whatever the Fahrenheit is, minus 32. So inside of here we've got our function name here, so this is what we're going to use to call it. We've got our parameter, so we're going to chuck a Fahrenheit in here, and then we're going to say we're going to do 5 divided by 9 first. Remember, anything inside of brackets is done before it's the operations outside of the brackets are done. So this will do 5 divided by 9. It will then do Fahrenheit minus 32, and then it's going to times them both together. So let's see how this works in context. So we'll say console.log, and then we're going to call 2 Celsius, and in brackets let's chuck 77 degrees Fahrenheit in there. If we refresh, you can see this now drops to 25, which is what it is in degrees Celsius. So that's a nice practical example of how a function would be used. Obviously the scope of functions are humongous and probably not worth covering in this video, so I'm going to do another video later on down the line of really useful ways to use functions, but this is the core of it. As long as you know how to call a function, how to pass parameters to it, and return the operations from within the function, that's all you really need to know for the time being anyway. Okay, so from covering variables earlier on in the video and to now covering functions, it's going to make scopes a little bit easier to explain. So with variables, you've got global and local variables. So an example of a global variable would say, if we were to say make a variable of car name and give it the value of Rover, which is probably one of the best car brands in the world, and then if we were to create a function called return model, and inside of this function we create another variable called car model, and we give that the value of 25 GTI, which again is, it's got to be probably one of the best car models out there. Only 101 of them left now, so pretty rare as well. But these are both a global and a local variable. So the global variable obviously is just one, it sits outside of the function and can be accessed from anywhere within the JavaScript. And a local variable sits inside of the function here and can only be accessed within that same function. So a practical example of this would be if we were to console.log and then inside of here we say car name. Save and refresh, you can see we get Rover output because it is accessing it, or has the ability to access that variable. However, if we would say output car model, save and refresh, you can see instead we get an error thrown and nothing's output because it cannot access this in here, which begs the question, which to use? So you try and declare everything outside of functions, inside of functions. The answer is to try and use global variables as little as possible. So try and minimize what you're declaring outside of functions and instead try to declare everything locally. This is especially the case if you've got a big project and you're working on a big project, especially with other people, then you don't want to be declaring the same things as other people and then having to overwrite each other's variables, which can cause errors in the code and everything like this. So declaring them inside of your own function, which means if someone else uses car model in another function down the line, they're not going to interfere with each other, and therefore you don't get any errors in your code. So it's definitely good practice to use local variables over global variables. So one huge benefit JavaScript has is its ability to manage events as well. We're going to show you an example quickly of how those work. Let's head over into our HTML document and we'll make a button tag, and we'll give the button tag an on-click attribute, and this is going to be a variable, so we'll call this clicked. It's going to be a function, sorry. So we'll say clicked, and then obviously we'll do our two braces there to make sure that we know it's a function, and then let's just give it click me. So what this is going to do is when the button has been clicked, it's going to call this function. So if we refresh this now and click, you'll see we're going to get an error, and that will be because we don't have clicked defined yet. So if we head over into our scripts and we make a function and we call it clicked, and we will just have an alert inside of here, and we'll give it the text, I have been clicked. So if we save that, refresh and click again, you'll see we now get an alert drop down saying I have been clicked, which is its event listener, right? So it's basically listening onto this button attribute, and it's saying as soon as it's been clicked, call this function, and obviously because we've got our scripts linked down here, it will search inside of here as well, and it will find clicked, and then it will print out the alert of I have been clicked. Brilliant. So event listening is fantastic. Obviously you've got on click, you've got on hover, on mouse enter as well, so you can have it as soon as your mouse is entered. You've got on key down, so as soon as the user presses a key, you can have it predefined to maybe as soon as they press I don't know, T, it pulls up a different tab, or it pulls up a different variable or something like this. So events are definitely something to get used to, because they can be very, very handy. As soon as we have end in every segment like this now, it's very handy, but it is incredibly handy. So talking about being incredibly handy, nicely transitions me onto our next topic, which is selection and loop statements. So selection and loop statements basically take variables in, or take parameters in, and they make a decision of some kind and then return that decision. So the most common one that most people would have maybe even heard of before is an if statement. You've also got for statements and while statements. We're going to cover all three of those here. The first one is going to be an if statement. So let's make a driving one. Can you drive or not? Right. So let's make a variable of age. We'll give it the value of 18, which is how old I am. We'll then have another one called past, and we'll give this one true. Right. So 18 years old. Past equals true, which is going to be our Boolean. Now an if statement starts off by saying if, it's then followed by two brackets, and inside of here you can put your arguments. So the first one that we're going to do is say age is greater than or equal to. We're going to cover more of these operators a little bit later on. So in the UK you need to be 17 years old to drive a car on the road. So if age is greater than or equal to 17, we want to do something, but we also want to make sure that they're passed as well. So if this is the only thing you want to do, you can make curly brackets and then you can write your statement inside of here. But we also want to make sure that passed equals true. So we can do that by having two and signs and then passed. And if we only put one equals here, it's going to set passed to true. So to check that it is a value, we put two equal signs and then true. So this is saying if the age is greater than or equal to 17, and past equals true, not not becomes true, if pass equals true, then we're going to run this in here, which is going to console.log. Well done. You are old enough to drive and have passed your test. So if we save and refresh, you can say, oh, brutal, he's put a 1 instead of an exclamation mark. Rookie error that. But you can see it's now put, well done, you are old enough, because it's taken in those arguments, it's assessed them, and they both seem to be true, and so it's passed on here. However, what happens if passed equals false and we refresh this? We don't get an output. So instead, what we're going to do is make an else, and this is wrapped in curly brackets as well. And so in here we can say console.log. So this is basically going to say if this condition isn't met, output this. However, if it is met, output that. So we'll say sorry, you have not passed your test. So if we save and refresh this now, you'll see we've got sorry, you have not passed your test. Because now we're saying if the age is greater than or equal to 17 and passed equals false, then it's going to output this. An easier way to demonstrate this would probably be to say if we leave this at true and then change this one to false. So pass is now false. If we refresh this, we'll get the same output, but pass is now false. So age is greater than or equal to 17, so that one's going to be true, but pass is now equal to false. So this one is false, and so it skips out this first one and instead prints out the second one. But what if we want to take it a step further and we want to check to see whether they're just not old enough or whether they haven't passed their test yet, and then output a message depending on that? Well, we can make what's called an else if statement. So this else here, if we have a space and then we say if, and inside of these brackets we can make another condition. So if we say age is less than 17 and passed, well, if in this case you're not going to pass your test because you're not over the age of 18, but if we just output that instead, so we've got another else there. So if we take out that console.log and put it in there, and this one is instead going to say now you are not old enough. So just to take you a walk through, if we refresh this, you won't see anything. If we change the age to 16 and refresh this, you see you're not old enough. So the way this is now working, I'll take you through it. It says if the age is greater than or equal to 17 and past equals true, output this. If that's not the case, check to see if the age is less than 17. If it is, output this. If the age is not less than 17, then the only other thing that's really going to be the case that's stopping this is pass is going to be false. So anything else, output sorry, you have not passed your test yet, which is exactly what happens. So that's an if statement, incredibly handy for selection, and really a vital tool in the old JavaScript toolbox. So let's refresh this and move on to our next one, which is a while loop. So let's make a variable called mynum, and we give it the value of 5. And what if we want to loop through or keep outputting numbers from 5 until we get to 10? So this can be done by saying while. Same kind of syntax as an if statement, so we'll say while, and inside of these brackets we'll say mynum, and here's another operator's not equal to, which is declared as exclamation mark equals. So whilst mynum is not equal to 10, do this inside of the brackets. So remember from earlier we had increment, so we'll say mynum, my bum, so mynum equals an incremented version of mynum, and we'll then have it output mynum. Right, so quickly before I run this, obviously we've got a variable called mynum which is defined as 5, and this while loop is saying look at mynum, and while it is not equal to 10, increment it by 1, show us, and then loop back to the start. Check this again. If this isn't the case still, increment it by 1, output it, loop back to the start again, and keep doing this until mynum is in fact equal to 10. and then it will stop. So if we refresh this now, you'll see we get 6, which is my num plus 1. Okay, it's now incremented to 7, so we're now on another loop of this. Okay, up to 8, so we've gone back around again. Okay, up to 9, so we've gone around again. And okay, up to 10, it's gone round the while loop again. If we okay this now, it goes away, because we've now broken from the while loop, because this condition is now met. My num is equal to 10. So that's a while loop. Useful for looping through arrays, maybe if you're looking for something. Very handy. But if you want a bit more control over how it increments, or what your variables are in the incrementation process, that was really good, wasn't it? You can use what's called a for loop. So we can start it off by saying for, again, exact same syntax, for, and then in brackets, we're going to make a variable called I, and we'll set it equal to 0. And then with this, we want to keep looping through while I is less than 10. And then we'll put another semicolon, and the incrementation process will say I++, right? So outside of these, outside of this definition, now it's basically starting I at 0, and it's going to increment I up until it is greater than or equal to 10, right? So inside of here, an easy way to visualize this would just be to console.log, and then we'll say this number is, and then plus I. So if we save and refresh this now, you'll see we get this number is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, as it's incrementing through this. So it's starting at 0, and while it's less than 10, it's incrementing up by 1 and then going back through it, which is why it's only making its way to 9, because as soon as I is no longer less than 10, so if it's equal to 10, it's not going to loop through. So if we change this to 11, save and refresh, you'll see we now have 10 output, because it's going one step further basically. So now it's saying while I is less than 11, so as soon as it becomes 11, it breaks out of its loop, and it doesn't continue on further than that. So that's the 3 looping: selection, while, if, for, malarkey. Super useful for JavaScript, and declaring if certain things should be a certain way, or for validation and things like this. So make sure you know that, because that's very important. So let's take a quick backtrack onto the variables and look at how each of them can kind of be manipulated to get certain information from them. So let's start off with strings. So let's make a string called myString, and we'll set it equal to, this is website bytes, and I'll actually show you a little trick here as well, a little secret trick. So if we say website bytes, and then obviously this is website bytes JavaScript crash course, right? But website bytes you'd want another single apostrophe there, but you can see it actually breaks out of this because we start and end our value with that. So the way that to include this in the value instead of breaking it would be to put a backslash in front of it. And you see this text now turn back to green. So it gets to here, and instead of actually counting this as the end of that statement, because there's a backslash in it, it includes it in there. So if we were to just console.log this now, myString, save and refresh, you can see it outputs everything, and the apostrophe along with it is outputted, or is output with it, outputted. It's output with it. So very handy. Also works with your quotation marks like this. So if you're having a weird error where something's breaking somewhere and you're only getting half of a variable put out, make sure that's been taken care of. Now with string, there's a lot of string manipulation you can do. First thing you can do is check the length of it, which is done by the variable name. So myString.length, we refresh this, gives us the length of it in characters, so it's 37 characters long. That includes spaces. Another handy thing we can do is to search as well. So if we were to search for, the search takes a parameter, so if we were to search for JS, refresh, it gives us the index as to which the JS will start. So 22 characters in, JS starts, and that is specific as well. So if you were to put JSF, that doesn't exist, so it will just it will return null, because that's not going to happen. But obviously that returns the 22nd index. You can also do index of. So index of does a very similar thing. So you can say index of JS. If we save and refresh this, you can see we get 22 output again. But the difference with index of is that this also takes another parameter, which is a starting value. So you can see that JS is output at 22, and it doesn't occur anywhere else. So after JS, if we put comma and then say 25, what we're telling it to do here is look for JS after the index of 25, which isn't going to happen because after the index of 25 it doesn't exist. So if we refresh this now, you see we'll get -1 as an output, which is essentially null. It doesn't exist past that index. And so it won't be found. So if you want to search an entire string for something, you can use .search. But if you want to, if it's a massive string or a massive data set and you want to optimize it a little bit better, you can use .index of, which will take you, allows you to search a specific range, which is pretty cool. Slice is another one that we can use. So slice basically will take certain values out of that string. So if we start at index 8 and end at index 20, save and refresh, you'll see we have website bytes perfectly printed out. It's as if I have planned this tutorial ahead of time. And so what it's doing here is outputting from index 8, which is here, to index 20, which is down here. If I was to change this to 25, save and refresh, you can see it's now website bytes, it's JS. And if we move this forwards to maybe 3, save and refresh, you can see we get the S of this, and is website bytes JS. So that's handy. 25. So if you know the exact position of such word or such element inside of a data set that you want to grab, you can use .slice and then the index to grab that specific variable out there, which is very handy. Another useful thing with slice as well is it works backwards. So if I swap these values to, let's say, -30 and -18, obviously I haven't done this before, save and refresh, you can see that we get, well, obviously I haven't done it before because we're getting the wrong ones, but you can see we've got a space here and then website bytes, or website byte even. So what the minus symbols do is it starts working backwards. So if we do 31, save and refresh, you see we get the S of is. If we do -35, save and refresh, you said is, so the IS of this and then is. So let's change that to instead 29. Save and refresh, so we just have the start website, and then what is it, 17? Will grab us the S as well. So instead of starting the index here and working forwards, we're starting the index here and working backwards. So not many applications for that, but it's a handy thing to have just in case. Next, you can replace certain parts of the string. So inside of the string, we can look for JS and then a comma, and another argument after this will be what you want to replace that with. So if we say HTML, save and refresh, you can see it says this is website bytes HTML crash course. So it's looking through the string, it's finding JS, our first parameter, which is here, and it's then replacing it with our second parameter, which is HTML. So pretty cool. If you want to change people's names or things like that in a document, you can do that. Next one, to lowercase. This could also be kind of a validation thing almost. So if we were to save and refresh this, see it's going to convert the entire statement to lowercase. So if someone's inputting information, you can convert it all to lowercase, keep it standardized. At the same time, you can also have uppercase, which I, for some reason, typed in uppercase. If I save and refresh this, see it's outputting everything in uppercase, which is again something just kind of handy to have for validation. So when things are being input by users, you can standardize the way that it's being kept, so you don't have random capital letters or lowercase letters anywhere. It's all uniform, which is very nice. Next one's char at, or character at, and this allows you to pull a specific character from that string at said index. So if we gave it the index of 0, save and refresh, it's going to give us the T, which is index 0 here. Remember, JavaScript counts from 0 upwards, so it says 0, 1, 2, 3, blah blah blah. So index 0 here. Again, if we were to change this to maybe index 10, save and refresh, we've got the B, which will be this one here, index 10. And the last thing that we'll cover is split as well. So split's very handy if you've had a big amount of information entered. You can split the string into an array using a kind of a character or a break mark almost. So if we want to break this into an array, each word into an array, we'll use the space as the split. So we'll give it the parameter of just a space inside of some single quotation marks. Save and refresh, and we see this now outputs an array. This is website Bytes' JS crash course, all as an array with a length of 6. So it starts at 0, counts up to 5. And we're using a space, so it will read this, and then it will know there's a space here, so it will use that as a split. It will then say I is, notice there's another space, split it again, and so on until it reaches the end. And you can use anything for this as well, so we can say is, if we wanted to use is as our split. Refresh, you can see that it recognizes an IS inside of this, so it splits. It then has a space, recognizes another IS, splits, and then website Bytes, and then there's no other IS after that, so the rest of it's all in one. So the polar opposite to strings would be numbers or integers, and JavaScript handles integers in actually quite a handy way, quite useful, especially if you're doing kind of scientific calculations or anything where you're involved with exponentials or square roots or flooring numbers, rounding them up, rounding them down, etc. So let's declare a couple of variables. So we'll have A, and we'll set this to pi, so 314, and then we'll have B, and we'll set this to just 3. We'll have C, and we'll set this to an exponential number. So the way that you do this is we'll say 123, and then we want an exponential of 4 on that. So it'll obviously add 4 zeros. So instead of saying 1, 2, 3, 0, 0, 0, 0, we can just say 1, 2, 3, an exponential of 4, which will give it 4 extra zeros, and then we'll make another one. And this also works backwards as well. So if we say 1, 2, 3, and then E minus 4, that will kick it further back. So if we save that, and then let's just console.log these. So console.log, we'll have A, B, C, D, B, C, D, save and refresh. So we have 3.14, 3, and then 1,230,000, and then 0.0123. So you can use floating point numbers or fixed point numbers. You can have whole integers, and you can have exponential values as well, which is incredibly handy. One thing to note with variables or numbers, sorry, is that we haven't put these in quotation marks because you don't need to. They're not strings, right? So a good example of this is if we were to say variable A, and we gave it a value of 10, but in this time in quotation marks, and then we defined a B of also 10 in quotation marks, and then we tried doing console.log and then A plus B, end it with a semicolon, save and refresh. You'll see it's outputting 10, 10 because it's treating them as strings, right? But that's only the case with positive. If we were to say negative, so A negative B or minus B, it's going to give us a 0, right? Because it's going to recognize that they're integers. However, with the addition, because addition is also used for strings, if you were to say hello plus world, it will output hello world, right? But you can't do hello minus world, so it will recognize that there's only integers inside of this, so it will subtract them. But obviously, if it is an integer, make sure you don't have quotation marks around it, and instead just leave them open like that. That way you make sure that they're going to be formatted properly. Should things go a little bit backwards, you're in luck though, because if we were to say variable A equals 100 divided by, and then have JavaScript, JavaScript's got something called nan, which is not a number. So if we were to console.log this now, so console.log a, save and refresh, you'll see we've got a. So it's telling you that the output of this is not a number. And as well as it being able to do that, you can also say is nan. So you can actually explicitly ask, is this expression or this argument or this variable or whatever you pass into it, is that a number, and or is it not a number? Sorry, is it not a number? And it will output a true or false or a Boolean operator or Boolean result, depending on whether or not that is a number. So handy, very handy. Another very handy, I'm saying handy a lot this video, I don't really know why, but I mean it's just very handy scripting language, I guess. But something that's useful, in fact, is that JavaScript numbers also carry hex values. So if you're into color space, if I was to go to HTML color picker, you'll see if we have a look at some colors here, this value here, hashtag and then 6 characters or 6 numbers or whatever, that is a hex value of color, right? So if we go up to the top left here, you can see white is hashtag FFFFF. And so in JavaScript, we can say if we make a variable called variable hex and start it with 0x, anything following this can be a hex value. So if we say FF, one thing you should know with hex as well is if you've only put a certain amount of characters in, it will duplicate those down. So if you only put FF, because it needs 6, it will automatically duplicate to FF, 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 right? And if we console.log this, something interesting that you will find is that instead of outputting that, it outputs an RGB value instead. So 255 is in fact white, and I can show you that by going to the color picker, go up to the top here, and you can see all 3 of them are 255, which is white, and that's what we get output. So I don't really know the application of this, but it's a handy thing to have just in case you want it. Some more helpful things though are to convert a number to a string. So if you're trying to output a big long string of things and you've got a random integer in the middle of there, you want to format it all properly. So let's make my num, let's give it a value of 100. The way that you can, if we just output console.log this to my num, save and refresh this, you see we get output 100, right, which is fantastic. However, we can also do mynum.toString, and then because it's a function, you need to give it some brackets. And then if we refresh this, save and refresh, you see we don't get anything different because it's not like it's changing the value of anything at all. It's just changing how it's identified. So you can easily append this to a string, and you won't have errors where there'll be like a cross between the different types that are being assigned to that variable. So toString is very handy. Something else that is also very handy is toExponential as well. Exponential. I think I've spelt that wrong. Yes, expo. Oh no, I've got 2 dots in there, silly sod. Dear me. So this gives you the exponential value of a number. So obviously it's 1e plus 2. If we were to spam on some zeros here, save and refresh, it's 1e plus 9. So we've got 9 extra zeros. Good if you're really mathematical or something like that. That's not gone well, is it? Something else that could go better is toFixed. And toFixed, you're basically telling it to have a fixed amount of decimal places after it. So we're saying mynum, convert this to a fixed decimal place and give it 2 spaces afterwards. Good demonstration. Change this to 5, save and refresh. We've now got 5 decimal places after the variable. So pretty cool. Some other pretty cool stuff is math function. So let's start off by saying console.log. And if we save and refresh this, wow, nothing's being output. Anyway, so we've got math, right? And math is defined with a capital M, and we can say math dot a range of different functions, right? So if we say math.pi with capital letters, save and refresh, you can see it's outputting pi, the value of pi, which is fantastic. Although that's a little long for us, so what we can do is concatenate on another argument after that and say .pi dot and then to precision, and then in brackets we can say how many how many numbers we want in that. So if we say 5, save and refresh, you can see it's now only outputting 5 characters of that number. And so if we only wanted 3, so 3.14, we can enter 3 there, and it will only output 3 numbers. Pretty cool. So obviously pi is used a huge amount, and so that's a very useful thing to know. The next thing would be the dot round. So if you say math.round, and then we'll give it a value of 5.3, save and refresh. Because 0.3 is closer to 5, it's going to round it down. Obviously, if it's 5 or upwards, so 5.6, it's going to round it upwards. However, if you want 5.6, in this case, if you always want to round down to the lowest value, you can say math.floor. And what math.floor will do is take whatever the value is and round it down to the lowest integer. However, math.ceil, so CEIL, will always round it up. So a good example of this, 5.2, save, refresh, it will round it up to 6 all of the time. Obviously they've got their own uses, and in some cases that is a must anyway, so it's worth taking note of those. Something else as well is pow, so power. You can give it 2 arguments for this one, so we'll say 5 to the power of 3, which is 125, so 5 times 5 times 5, same as doing 5 and then a little 3 up to the top right of it. So you can calculate the power of a number through it as well. You can also calculate the square root, which is SQRT, so square root, and then in brackets, let's say 64, save and refresh, is 8, so the square root of 64 is 8, and these go on and on and on with loads of different functions you can do, and there's docs online, and I'll link to them in the description as well, that show you a huge amount that the math function can do inside JavaScript, and it's an invaluable resource. There you go, mixing up the vocabulary a little bit. An invaluable resource for arithmetic and logic and processing information, because it really can come in handy. So yeah, make note of that. Something else that math can do as well is find the min and the max. So if we have math.min and we feed it a bit of an array here, so let's give it the numbers of 0, 18, we'll throw in a negative to make it interesting, -5, 6, and then another one, -3.5. Save and refresh. It's going to output the minimum or the lowest value inside of that array, which is obviously -5, and then on the flip as well, you can also output the max or the highest value in that array, which is 18, which is pretty cool for sorting, but we're going to come back to sorting a little bit later on. Another one is math.random as well. So this generates you a random number, and because it's a function you need brackets, so math.random, and you can see it actually generates you a number between 0 and 1 and gives you a huge amount of different different numbers and a huge decimal number, right, which isn't very handy at all. And so say you wanted a number between 0 and 9, you can say math.random times by 10, right? Save and refresh, and this is going to give you a number between 0 and 9 now, so we're not just limiting ourselves between 0 and 1, but we're still getting all this huge amount of numbers here, and we really don't want that. So we're going to floor it, right? So if you remember from before, math.floor rounds everything down to the lowest value. So we'll say math.floor and then wrap the random function in some extra brackets there. So if we save and refresh, you can see it's generating the random number and then flooring it or rounding it down to 4. So if we keep refreshing this, you can see it will keep generating us some random numbers all the way from 0 to 9. And obviously if you want it to 10, you can change that to times 11, and soon we'll probably see, well, I mean, they're random, so we could be sat all night, but there's a 10. So it's that thing where JavaScript's starting at 0 again and working its way up. But math.random, if you're maybe generating keys, or you're got a game where random elements happen, or maybe you want like an alert to drop down after a random amount of time a user's been on a website, math.random can help you do that. So super useful, the math functions. As I said, I'll leave a link in the description so that you can go and have a look at the huge array of different applications the math function has. Invaluable resource, as I said a second ago, invaluable. So we're going to revisit arrays again, and we're going to have a look a little bit deeper into some of the functions you can do with arrays. Start off with, though, obviously we're going to need an array. So let's say a variable of some numbers, and again, remember, to declare an array you need some square brackets, and we're going to put our variables inside of here. So let's say we'll have 32, 45, 19, 13 and 79. So a nice little range of numbers there. Let's call it some numbers though, because there's more than one. Come on. And if we were to output this, so console.log and then some numbers, you'll see it's going to output it as an array again. So index 0 has got 32, index 1, 45 and so on. Outputs it all as an array. If we were to output the second number again, remember it starts at 0, so 0, 1 will give us a second number, which is 45. Very handy. And again, with the strings as well, you can also figure out with an array.length, but instead of counting the characters, it's going to count the elements. So some numbers.length is going to output 5, because obviously there are 5 different elements inside of that array. You can also do some numbers.sort as well, or array.sort. Save and refresh, and you can see it's now going to sort the array in order. And so if you remembered before, obviously here 32, 45, 19, 13, 79, all are out of order, but the .sort array on the array, .sort method, sorry, on the array will put it all in order. And you can reverse this as well by simply typing .reverse. So some numbers .reverse, refresh, and it's now going to sort it backwards, which is cool. So it's going to take the elements and kind of screw them up a little bit, which is not really know what the application of that could be, but we never know. Kind of mixes it up a little bit, throws them all over the place. So that's sorting and jumbling and declaring an array. If you want to add an item to an array, though, this can be done through the push function, push and pop. So if we were to say some numbers, I'm only doing it out here because this can't be done in a console.log. So some numbers, and then we'll say .push, and in brackets we say what we want to push. So if this was a string, you do your quotation marks and you do whatever you want to say inside of here, but this is an integer, so we're just going to say some numbers.push. And then if we were to output some numbers again, you can see it's now reverted back to what it was before, and then it's pushed 10 onto the end as well, which is pretty cool, because then normally otherwise you'd find the length of it, you'd find the length of the array, which would be here, you'd then add 1 and then add the element to that, but the push function makes that incredibly simple for you. And then if we do some numbers.pop, you don't need to give this any kind of a parameter, but instead what pop will do is it will pop off that last variable. So if we refresh this, you can see it's pushing number 10 on and then outputting it here, and then it's popping, and so it removes that last element from the array, and then we've told it to output again. So that's pretty cool. That's for adding variables onto an array, like near the end, if you're just creating a big database of things. But if it's sorted, or you need to add things in a specific order, you can use the shift and unshift methods. So if we say some numbers dot shift, right? So we say dot shift, and then inside, well, you don't actually need to say anything inside of .shift. If we console.log, console never looks right. I don't know why, it's weird spelling. But if we then output some numbers, you can see what it's done is it's taken the first element this time and it's shifted the elements down. Quickly, a bad way of doing this, I'll demonstrate this to you just in case you try doing it this way, make sure you don't. You can also do delete as well, so you can say delete some numbers, and then you need to give this an attribute, so we'll say 0, and then if we just comment this out, comments are done by double forward slashes, by the way. We actually need that to output. So if we refresh, you can see it's deleted the element, but it's left it as empty. So that's very bad, really. Well, it's not terrible, but it's really inefficient to leave empty spaces in an array. So this works, but should never really be used. Instead, you should be using shift. So what shift does is it takes away the first element, and then it looks at all the other items in here and shifts them one down to the left. Another thing to do is to unshift. So if we change this to some numbers.unshift, we can assign a variable that we want to go in at the first position. So let's just say 101. Save and refresh. You can see it now. It doesn't take away the first element. Instead, it moves everything up one to the right, and it puts in a new element at position number 1. So right at the front of the array. So maybe let's think, if you've got users being added to a website maybe, or you've got orders, if you were to do some numbers or orders dot unshift and then the order details inside of here, if you were to call up this array, the most recent order will obviously be at the front of the array. So that's probably the most practical example I can think of for that, but yeah, pretty good. So if you wanted to modify a certain one in here, so if we come in here, maybe 101, let's just for example, we change that to 102 because we didn't mean to type 101, we meant to type 102. That can be done. I might as well just leave console.log some numbers there. So this can be done by saying some numbers. So we're calling some numbers, and then in brackets we're going to define what index of some numbers we want to look at. So let's look at number 2, and then with a single equal sign we can redeclare some numbers at index 0 to 102. If we refresh this, you can see we've now got 102 in at index 1 instead, because we're not saying if some numbers is equal to 102, which is what that would be. Instead, we're saying take index 0 and assign it to 102. Right, so in this case, index 0 is 32, and so it's taking 32 and it's reassigning it to its new value. So pretty cool. Something that you can do alongside this, so another way to add items into an array would be to splice. So if we say some numbers dot splice, and then inside of here we can pass a couple of arguments. So we can say if we want to splice in a number at index 2, right? So we'll put 2, and then it's followed by the amount of elements you want to delete. Okay, so if we don't want to delete anything, we just want to put it in after number 2, we'll say 0. If you want to get rid of number 3 and almost replace it, then you'd put 1 here, so it's going to delete one element after it, but in our case we're going to just put 0, and then you're going to put the value that you want to put in there. So we'll say 199. So if we save and refresh this, now you can see it's index 1, index 2, and then at index 3 here it is inserting our new object that we have told it to insert into. So if you've got a sorted array, so as we've covered before, you can sort the array. If it is already sorted and you know exactly where this element needs to go, instead of adding it into the array and then resorting it, you can instead find what index it needs to go into and then splice it straight into the index, which is obviously very handy. If you've got quite a big array and you're trying to maybe splice it into multiple different ways, you can use the slice function. These all slice, splice, make a little tongue twister out of them. But let's slice this array. So we're going to make another variable. We'll call this one var other numbers. And this is going to be equal to some numbers. So we're going to take in the values of some numbers, and we're going to slice them after element 3. So after element 3 we're going to slice them, and that's not going to split it, which I'm going to show you now. It's not going to split the array. If we refresh this, instead it's just going to say after element 3 take those indexes and assign them onto another variable called other numbers. Right, so we've got some numbers which have got these 5 elements in, and then we're going to take those last 2 and we're going to redefine them or move them into another array element. Maybe if you want to take the top 5 players, for instance, out of an array, so you've got all the high scores inside it. I'm just giving a practical example here. This probably isn't very useful, but if you had all the high scores here and this was sorted, you could take the last couple, so the lowest players, and you could take the top few, which is the highest players, and you could output those, which is where slice will come in handy, because then you're not taking them out of the leaderboards at all. Instead, you're just moving them or copying them, if you like, instead of moving them, copying them into another array of highest scores. But that's arrays, very useful, very handy, as I've been saying a lot. I mean, it just is. JavaScript's a very useful language to understand, and obviously with the interaction that you can do with arrays and objects and things like this. We're going to cover JSON in a minute, which is really exciting. But you can obviously store huge amounts of data with arrays, and it's very easily accessible. So just before we cover JSON, I'm going to have a quick look at Booleans as well, or Booleans. Booleans are either true or false, and not false. So true or false, 1 or 0. There's a range of different ways you can define a Boolean or what it represents. But let's make a variable, and we'll say human. So human equals true. We are human. Save, and if we were to not insert, if we were to go console.log and then human. Oh dear, typing's going a bit downhill at the moment. Save and refresh. You see it's output true. If we were to change that to false, it would output false. But what if hasn't got anything in it? If we save and refresh, it's get undefined, which isn't very useful in terms of maybe seeing if it's got a value in it or not. So if we wanted to make sure that this has a value in it, we can use a Boolean method. So if we say Boolean and then wrap that in its own brackets, save and refresh, we see we'll get false. So this Boolean method is a good way of determining whether a variable has a value or not. So if we now give this just some random text, you'll see it outputs true, because the Boolean method has checked human. There is a value inside of it. It's not just an empty variable, so it's outputting true. So it's not just handy for defining variables, but it's also useful for determining whether there's a value there or not. And then also, if we just console.log, it's also useful for simple selection like this. So is 5 greater than 10? Refresh, that's obviously false. However, is 5 greater than 1? Save and refresh, that's true. So Boolean's very handy, relatively unknown. Well, not unknown, sorry, they're just not used a great deal, but incredibly powerful. Okay, so on to JSON then. So JSON is a data type that can hold huge amounts of information. Whenever really you create an account on a website, maybe, most of the time you'll probably see it generated into a JSON file, which has all the other users stacked up against it, or it's moved into a database or something equivalent. What I've made here is a simple JSON file almost. I'm going to cover JSONs in another video and how to write JSONs and properly parse them, but we're going to have a quick look at how to do so today. And so don't worry if you don't understand how this is syntax. I'm going to take a quick walk through it, but for more information, once the video's up, obviously I'll link it in the description, but it is something that I'll cover a little bit later on down the line. But the thing with JSON is to note that it's useful for searching or indexing, huge amounts of information, right? If you have a massive JSON file, it's easy to extract certain information in there about a certain person or object, right? So what you see here is I've made a JSON file with some of the best directors in there, right? In my opinion, obviously, I don't want to kick up a fuss here, but in my opinion, I should have started. These are the best directors. So you've got Quentin Tarantino, Matthew Vaughn, and Stanley Kubrick. Now, if we were to console.log best directors, you'll see it gets outputted beautifully. However, it's not very easy to read, right? And it's dumping us all the information at once. So what we can do is we can assign it to another variable. So let's call this directors object, right? So obj, and we will use the JSON. So we'll say equals JSON.parse, and what this is going to do is take the parameter of the file or the variable that we want to pass, in this case best directors. It's going to pass it into objects, which each have their own children or their own attributes or anything that you want to call them. So if we now console.log, we can individually target each one of these things in here as its own object, which is really cool, right? So we can say directors object. So remember, this is now our main variable that this has been passed into. So we can say directors object dot directors. So we're looking inside of here, and this directors is obviously wrapping all this information inside of these square brackets here. So directors is kind of the parent. So we're saying directors look at index 0. So this will be the Quentin Tarantino file, and output his first name. So if I save and refresh this, you can see it's outputting Quentin. Let's get rid of that just for ease. So it's outputting Quentin. So again, what it's doing is what we've done is take our JSON variable here in the JSON format. We've assigned it to a variable called best directors. We're then using the JSON parse function to take in best directors and pass them into objects, or pass that into objects, make each one of these its own separate block. And then we're saying look in this new object file, this new object variable, directors object. Look inside of directors and target item number 0, which is the first in the list, and grab the element first name. So it's looking in here. It's looking at the first index. It's looking for first name, and this is the value that it's going to output. Again, I'll cover that in a JSON specific video, but just the fundamentals of it really are being able to understand how to parse a JSON, which is exactly what this is. Another example, if we look at index number 2, which in this case is 3, and we output the last name, this will give us Kubrick, because we've looked now at the third item in that array, and we're looking at the last name variable now, and this is the value assigned to that variable, so it'll output Kubrick, which is what it's done. So as I said, I'll cover JSON in another video down the line, but at the moment, if you can parse a JSON file that's come in and then understand how you can reference each individual object and its value, that's really all you're going to need. You probably won't even need to use that if you're starting from scratch with web development, but it's something good to have in your toolbox should you need it further down the line. Okay, so let's take a quick look at comparisons. So I noted earlier about if a value is greater than or equal to, or if it's directly equal to, things like this. Let's cover a few of the most common ones. So we'll start off with console.log. Obviously, the most common one is a value directly equal to another value. So if we save and refresh this, you see we'll get an error because I've misspelled log. So if I save and refresh this now, you'll see we get true. So 5 is in fact directly equal to 5, which is fantastic. Another one that you can do is a triple equals, and this makes sure that it's the same data type as well. So if we now wrap 5 in quotation marks, save and refresh, you'll see we'll get false, because although 5 is equal to 5, this is an integer and this is a string, so it kicks up a bit of a fuss and it doesn't like that very much. One that we covered earlier is not equal to, so is 5 not equal to 1? True. And this is an exclamation mark and then the equal sign, so is 5 not equal to 1? True. Another one is 5 not equal to 1 or have the same data type. So again, this is the triple operand in the middle. Save and refresh this. So 5 is not equal to 1 and they're not the same data type. So this is an integer again, this is a string. So both of those conditions lead the result to be true. Another one is obviously 5 greater than 1. Save. This is true. Is 5 less than 1? No. So refresh. The one way that I was taught to remember this back from lower school, and for some reason it's kept with me. Imagine this as a crocodile mouth, right? And the crocodile is hungry, so he's always going to open his mouth towards the biggest food. Yeah, you got to use a bit of imagination here, but so this crocodile mouth is currently open towards 1, which is obviously not the biggest food. So the crocodile mouth is going to go for the 5, which is greater than. So that's the way the greater sign works, or that's the way the less than sign works. Just some helpful little tips there that I learned from my lower school. Probably not going to be of use at all, you've probably got your own way. But another way, sorry, let's move on, is greater than or equal to. So if is 5 greater than or equal to 1? Yes, it is. Is 5 greater than or equal to 5? Yes, it is. Is 5 greater than or equal to 6? No, it's not. But is 5 less than or equal to 6? Yes, indeed it is. Is 5 less than or greater than, is 5 less than or equal to 5? Yes. And is 5 less than or equal to 4? No. So greater than, less than, greater than or equals to, and less than or equals to, all very handy comparisons. Obviously I'm going to include all the project files as a download link, and they'll all be nicely formatted and it'll have all the information in there that you need, so worth going over to the link at the top of the description to download the project files should you want to make note of any of this or have a play about with any of the code. But they're the most common comparisons, and obviously they can be used in if statements, while loops, for loops, the whole 9 yards. So yeah, pretty cool. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to cover in this crash course is the switch function, which is handy for running certain code depending on the output of another. Kind of similar to an if statement almost, but syntax is a bit easier to understand. So for this we're going to dive a little bit into dates and get dates. So let's say variable myDay is going to be equal to a new date function, and we're going to get the date. So we're looking at new date and we're getting the date, and what the date will do is give us we want to get day, so this will give us a value between 0 and 6, 0 being Sunday and 6 being Saturday, and then everything in between obviously being the working week. So you've got Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that's the week. And so if we were to now console.log and then my day, save and refresh, you'll see it outputs 0 because we are on a Sunday right now. So what we want to do is make a nice little program that will output a certain message depending on what day it is, right? So the way that you do a switch is we say switch, so we start it off and then in brackets we give it our parameter, so we're going to say my day. Then we're going to open up some curly brackets and we're going to say what we want to do depending on whatever the value of my day is in here. So you can start off by defining a default, and if you spell default correctly it helps. And what the default is if none of the other cases are matched, it will do this one, right? So it's almost like an else. So here we're going to say console.log, and then in brackets we'll have it is a weekday, sad face. And after every switch or case statement, sorry, you want to have a break. Take a break. Kit Kat advert there. So if none of our case declarations which we're about to declare are matched, so if none of them are matched, run the default, and the default being console.log, it is a weekday. However, should the case be 4, so is my day got the value of 4 in it, do this. But we also want to say if it's 4 or 5, so we'll say is case 4 colon and then is case 5 colon, and then inside of here, so this is obviously going to be Thursday and Friday, Thursday being 4, Friday being 5, so we'll say console.log, and then it is almost the weekend. Save and refresh. We're not getting anything at the moment because obviously it's not Thursday or Friday, so case 4 or 5 aren't being met. So it's running the default, which is saying it's a weekday. So we want to put a break after this one. And we want to say if the case is 0, which would be the case for today, then we can say console.log it is a Sunday. Save and refresh. And you can see that my day, as we showed before, is outputting 0 at the moment because it is indeed a Sunday, and so the switch value that's being passed into here is 0. So it's looking here, it's got is it case 4 or 5? No, so it's not going to run this, but it is case 0, so it is going to run this, and it's not going to go for the default. So just for illustrative purposes, we'll also add in case 6. So we'll say if it's case 6, console.log it is a Saturday, and then we'll make sure we've got our breaks in. Just to make sure that it doesn't continue down onto its next statement. So save and refresh. You see we get it is a Sunday because it's a 0. If I was to do it yesterday, it would have said it is a Saturday because it would have output as a case 6, and so on and so forth. So if you've got a relatively small data set and you just want to see if it's a certain value and output maybe a function, you can call a function in here if you wanted to, depending on if it's a certain value, then the switch can be very useful for that. So that wraps up our JavaScript crash course. I hope that you've learned something. That's the fundamental reasoning behind these videos, is to at least teach you something. And if you're starting from absolute scratch as well, hopefully this video gives you a strong base point to begin learning JavaScript and to go into it and open the doors to have a bit of a better understanding. I know when I first started learning JavaScript, I'd see some JavaScripts and I'd think, what the bloody hell is going on there? But hopefully after understanding functions and variable types and switch cases like this and console.logs and everything associated with what we've covered in this video, hopefully you'll be able to better understand it a little bit. So if you want to download the code, head over to the first link in the description. You can download the project files for this and have a play about with the code yourself. Alternatively, if you want to, you can leave a like on the video, show your support, and subscribe as well, because we're going to be having a lot more crash courses coming out, as well as individual one-off videos covering some nice simple topics. And we're also going to be building an entire website from the ground up soon, so that'll be good to follow along with. So hang around for a bit and you'll see all of that. Thank you very much for watching. As I said, I hope you've learned something, and I'll see you in the next video.